As is common in these types of videos, I first off want to say that I mean no ill intent by making this video, and I want to say thank you to Mr. Matthew for making a video about Edith Finch, because I love this game. By the way, if you watch this video, I am going to assume you know the basics of this game or watch the game theory video, so I won't go over it here. So, onto the real video, which is me debunking most of the things said by Game Theory about the game What Remains of Edith Finch. I disagree on a lot of points with the video Game Theory made about it, and I love this game too much to miss this opportunity to talk about it. So, first off, I want to start at the beginning with the FNAF opening.
If you're reading this, then unfortunately what I predicted came to pass. I was onto something. I was sure of it. But I also knew that uncovering secrets like this could very well lead to my demise. If I could just peek around the right corner, if I could just open the right box or turn the right knob, the truth would be made clear. Why? Why was this cold open in the style of FNAF when I was doing an episode about Edith Finch? I guess that would remain forever a mystery.
Why? Are you comparing it to FNAF? If so, I have a question. Is every game where kids die a FNAF game now? That kinda just reduces this game down to one aspect of the overall masterpiece that it is. Later on you also mentioned...
Gotta be honest, now that I know what this game is truly about, I am shocked that we didn't cover this thing sooner. I mean, it's right on brand for us. Fantastical stories, a family curse.
Which isn't even what your conclusion points you towards in any way, shape or form. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I should probably first look at what MatPat's says and what evidence he even presents to us. For anyone who hasn't seen the video of Mr. Game Theorist, he is basically trying to tell us this.
What if I tell you that great-grandma Edie is a serial murderer? That this supposed family curse that took the lives of at least 10 people was actually Edie the entire time? A serial killer bumping off members of the family one by one.
Well, I sure hope you got some evidence to back any of that up. The first evidence Sir Matthew brings up is that the stories have unreliable narrators.
Anyway, this game is narrated to us by Edith Finch, a young 17-year-old mother-to-be who heads back to her abandoned childhood home before the birth of her son to try and learn the truth of her family's backstory. The big twist at the end, spoiler alert, is that Edith has already died in childbirth, and that the whole game was her son Christopher reading the journal that she left behind for him. So already off the bat, we're dealing with a story about stories, about legends that are handed down from generation to generation. We also have a story about unreliable narrators, people telling their versions of events. Keep that one in mind, it's gonna be super important.
I get where he's coming from with stories like Molly's and Barbara's story, but other than that, we don't have any good examples where we can be sure that the narration is unreliable, and heck, depending on if you believe some of the supernatural things happening in this story, then none of this is unreliable. It all could be true if magic exists. But let's assume the best case for Matthew, that no magic exists, then depending on the story, I have to agree to him on this point. Also, he rambles on about this point for a bit and brings up these two clips.
Notice the word that I used here, tales of death, stories. These aren't necessarily the real events that resulted in family members' deaths. These all have some mixed element of truth and fiction. It's actually something that Edith herself begins to realize halfway through her journey.
I thought it was time I heard the stories for myself and found out what happened to everyone else. But now I'm worried the stories themselves might be the problem. Maybe we believed so much in a family curse, we made it real.
Edie, who I suspect was responsible for many, if not all of these deaths, and was then using a fabricated family curse to cover up the murders.
Edith has a right to know these stories.
My children are dead because of your story.
I think there's a different, more fitting explanation for this, but we will get back to that later. His next point he brings up is how Edie is the oldest one in the Finch family we know of.
Let's just take a second to look at great-grandma, shall we? The thing that first got me suspicious of her was her age. And no, that's not me being ageist, that's me noticing a very clear pattern here. In a family that's supposedly cursed, a family where the average age of death clocks in at 19 years old, where the oldest anyone has gotten is Edie's father Odin at 57, here's great-grandma Edie over here clocking it in at a ripe old 90 93. 93! Nearly double anyone else in the family. The only other person who lives even remotely that long in this family, Walter, who made it to his 50s, literally locked himself in a bunker for decades. Why did the family curse take so long to take Edie's life compared to everyone else? It struck me as
I have to tell you something important, my dear beloved Pathu. Do we know of anything crazy Edie ever did? We know Odin sailed his house across the ocean. We know Kelvin swung on a swing on the edge of a cliff. And we see similar patterns of reckless behavior in some of the other stories. So I don't think that's her problem, that's more a problem of the other people in this story. His third point is the following.
Even more sus, though, is that she keeps pictures of loved ones dying next to her bed. And let me be clear, I'm not saying pictures of dead loved ones, though that is more than true. I mean pictures of them in the process of dying. On a shrine opposite her bed, we see a photo of her husband, Sven, falling off the top of a dragon slide that he was in the process of building. This would be the event that would cause his death. Was the camera on a timer? Who took this thing, Edie? Regardless, if her having that picture next to her while she sleeps isn't evidence that Edie is totally disconnected from her emotions, I don't know what is. And mind you, she has plenty of other pictures of him being safe and happy, so it's not like this was the only one that she had to remember him by. It is weird, it is uncomfortable, and it starts to show that great-grandma Edie may have herself some very strange views on death.
If we truly believe that the picture is of the incident where Sven died, then my hunch would be that she keeps it as a kind of memory to him, like she did with the other stuff too, presumably, like the Mole Man story. I don't disagree that she could have strange views on death, but more importantly I think it shows how she embraces stardom and being famous. In my opinion, Edie keeps these for the fame and glory, as is also the reason for other stuff we'll get into in a bit. The fourth evidence Patrick brings up here is that Edie's father, Odin Finch, has wrote a few books, but I'll let him explain everything about that.
We see early on in the game that Edie has a shrine dedicated to her dead father, Odin. As part of that shrine, she has on display two of his books, Mysteries of Death and Thereafter and Joining the Great Majority. The game designers clearly put it here as part of the shrine for a reason, so why? Well, I had a sense that it had to do with death as well, and while it did take some digging, my hunch was right. The expression was first used by Edward Young, an English poet who did a lot of philosophical writings on the nature of death. The full quote goes as follows: "Life is the desert, life the solitude. Death joins us to the great majority." So Edie's father, Odin, was the guy who literally wrote the book on death. 2 books, in fact. And we see this obsession with death continue into Edie's story.
Sven built the house, but it was Edie who designed the cemetery. What kind of family finishes building a cemetery before starting the house?
As we could see by those clips, Edie and Odin were clearly thinking about death a lot. Why would that be in a family where the life expectancy is close to 20? I can't think of any reason why a family that feels like it's cursed with death looming over it at all time would think about death a lot. No reason. The fifth point Patrick brings up is the following.
She even finds death funny, including the tragic, premature death of her own husband.
When Edie told people Sven was killed by a dragon, she could also have said he was building a dragon-shaped slide that collapsed. She could have, but she didn't. I asked Edie once about the dragon in the pond. She said it had killed her husband. I was 6. It seemed like an odd joke to me, even then.
I don't think Edie found it funny that her husband died, but I do think that she wanted to gain fame from it. I know, it's a sad thing to say, but sadly people often try to gain something from other people's misery and misfortune. It happens everywhere from wars to stock market. Luckily not on YouTube, right? Please subscribe if you disagree. This and more hot takes at 11. And the evidence about Edie and the truth.
That right there just gives us more evidence that Edie and the truth don't always go hand in hand.
It's called clickbait and you should look it up, though I think you already know it too well.
But just because Edie's obsessed with death and happens to be a bit of a storyteller doesn't make her a killer, right?
Correct.
Well, no, not on its own, but take all those details and look a bit closer at some of the death stories that were told throughout the game, and suddenly Gran starts to look a whole lot more sinister.
I think I did a well enough job of explaining everything up to this point just as well and without leaving plot holes, so I will answer no here. Next up, Mr. Rickthew brings up the comic and throws out the wild claim that Edie might have on purpose or accidentally killed Barbara.
One of the most memorable sequences that we play through in the game is the death of Barbara. This one is told to us in the form of a pulpy Tales from the Crypt style horror comic. Basically, Barbara was a child star whose best years were behind her. One night, while her boyfriend's trying to teach her how to get her iconic scream back, she's attacked by a murderous hookman. We're shown that, under the bed, her younger brother Walter is hiding out of fear, but he witnesses the whole thing. She fends off the attacker using a crutch, knocking him over the balcony. When she goes down to check on him, in true horror story fashion, the hookman's body has disappeared. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door. Barbara opens it, sending in dozens of monsters who've come for a party. They wind up eating Barbara alive and only leaving her ear behind. And that is all we're told about Barbara's death. It's a weird story, right? And obviously it's heavily fictionalized, and yet we know elements of it to be true. We see the balcony of the Edith home still broken where the hookman, or whatever he was, fell. We also know that her younger brother Walter did in fact see something that sent him running to the basement in fear, living in a bunker under the house for decades in fear of what lay on the other side. He even keeps Barbara's crutch down there with him, above the fake window that he created for himself.
There is no indication in the story of that happening, so he brings up Walter to prove his point, but there's several problems here, but let's first hear him out.
Great-Grandma Edie did it. Intentionally or not, she caused Barbara's death. Let's look at the facts, shall we? As I mentioned before, Walter sees something the night of Barbara's death. Something that causes him to lock himself in an underground bunker for decades out of fear. When he's down in the bunker, he gives us this line.
If you wait long enough, you get used to anything. Even a monster on the other side of the door starts to feel normal.
He wasn't hiding from death or a curse. He was afraid of a monster on the other side of the door. He's so scared of this monster on the other side of the door that when he does eventually decide to leave his bunker, he digs a hole out the other side rather than going through the door and back into the house. And think back, who killed Barbara in her story? Monsters. We see that word being repeated, connecting these two stories, these two deaths together. So what sort of monster could be on the other side of Walter's door? Edie.
I saw Edie sneak down to the basement once, carrying packages. I thought maybe she was hiding presents. It turned out she was hiding a lot more than that.
I have a question, PatMat. Didn't you just say she came down there herself? If Edie came down there, wouldn't he just have attacked her? Wouldn't she just have killed him down there? I mean, they were alone for some years. She could have done him in good any time, but she didn't because she had no reason to. Also, she's probably the one who bought him food in the first place. I doubt they had rations down there that last for 30 years. He went out the lower end because he wanted to face his problems head on. He was tired of being scared. That's what killed him, not Edie. He even says that himself. It
Maybe
feels
this
like
is all a mistake.
America.
But I need to stop living the same day, even if it kills me.
Next up, Pathfinder goes back and explains how Barbara actually died.
My guess is that Edie and Barbara got into a fight about her boyfriend being in the house. During the confrontation, Edie gets violent and angry. She shoves Barbara, who's then knocked over the balcony railing, falling to her death. In fact, one small detail that's easy to overlook, but the game tries to make sure that we notice, is the roller skates on the balcony. As we climb the stairs in Barbara's story, a skate rolls down randomly. Later, the other skate is the thing that ultimately sends the hookman plunging over the balcony. That detail feels important. It feels real. That is the instrument of murder here.
As far as we know, it could be, but there's two huge problems. We know Edie wasn't even at home at the time because she went to the emergency room with Sven because he got injured. We don't know when they got back, I hear you say, but honestly, I don't think they'd be back in just a few hours, and even if, they'd probably have come home together. So I don't know if everyone would have just been cool with Edie killing their child/sibling. It really would make the most sense if it was the boyfriend, because we see him actively get hurt by Barbara several times. He had a motive, an opportunity, and the strength to do it. He also suspiciously disappeared afterwards. That's already incredibly sus, but it'd make most sense for him because we know he knew where he could hide once he was pushed down. Also, to get back to who this really is about by the locked door, we clearly know that Walter only heard things happening mostly and hasn't seen much himself probably, so it makes more sense that the sounds scare him rather than a person.
And if there was any doubt that the monster on the other side of the door is Edie, Walter also tells us this.
I can't believe I've been down here for 30 years. On that first day, after the shaking started, I didn't think I'd survive a week.
This isn't fear of a curse, that's imminent fear. That is fear of a real, palpable, current threat.
Yeah, so we agree he is scared of the sound.
Someone determined to silence a person who's seen too much.
What do you mean? He literally said that after the shaking started he didn't think he'd survive a week. What does that have to do with someone else? Is this a belated April Fool's joke? How did you even get to that conclusion?
And we know for a fact that there is indeed some dark secret to find inside the Finch household. Very early on in the game, we get this line.
I was 4 when Milton disappeared. Mom spent months searching for my brother. Then she sealed the doors. Whatever Milton had found in the house, Mom didn't want it getting out.
Milton is the only Finch to go missing, to not have himself a confirmed death.
3 points here. The mom didn't want it getting out. That means Edith's mom. So Dawn wouldn't want it getting out, which has nothing to do with their grandma Edie. Secondly, what they are talking about there is maybe the secret passageways, because Edie wasn't allowed to know them, because her mom didn't want that. That may only be because of Milton in the first place, but then they are still referencing something we don't know about, so we can't really say anything about that. And lastly, theoretically, we could also assume Barbara was kidnapped, maybe because only her ear was found, but that's just pure speculation.
He found something, and then he disappeared. It would seem like his fate is that of Walter's. You learn the truth, you go poof.
I honestly think it's more that Milton ran away, because in the short story we see about him is that he wants to go away. He literally draws a door and disappears, which I at least took as running away from home. I don't know why he would, and I also don't know if he'd have survived that, but that's the most we can do with the clues given.
Speaking of Walter, you know what else is suspicious? His death. Walter waits years to leave his bunker, only for him to immediately get hit by a train. The thing is, there's no train. The game takes place on a very real island. Orca's Island is an actual place in Washington State, and there is a train on that island. Kinda. It's a privately owned train by whoever owns the property that it resides on. From what I can tell, it's not so much of a railroad as it is a ride. It is hardly the massive steam locomotive that's implied in Walter's story, and that still doesn't explain why it was going underneath the private residence of the Finch household. Just doesn't add up.
Dear Mr. GT, I am sorry to break this to you, but there is no Queen of England, there is no real-life Freddy Fazbear location, and not everything in your media is 100% real, especially in games. It just fit the story of the family curse and the loud noise Walter was presumably afraid of, and that's why they did it. I doubt they ever expected anyone to research if Orca's Island does or doesn't have a railroad, not gonna lie.
Walter never specifically mentions the train either. However, if you look on the other side of the bunker, there's a model train set that Walter was clearly building. Maybe that happened to be the source of inspiration for the story that would ultimately cover up the truth about his death.
I agree that Walter never talked about the train, because he couldn't when he was dead. We don't know what happened after he stopped writing, which is probably the point MP was trying to make, but how could Edie fake the death to look like it was a train driving him over? And how did the authorities not see anything suspicious? I mean, the other deaths you brought up were fakeable until now to make them look like what the story said really happened. But this? Where would you even begin? If you can give me a good explanation that would hold up in a court, I'd be happy to know.
Because, you see, there's one other thing that you have to know about Great-Grandma Edie. Not only does she love making up stories, she loves the fame that comes from her stories. In another part of the room, we get this short story.
One summer, they evacuated the island, but Edie refused to go. For a few weeks, she was a celebrity.
MPGT. I think you hit it out of the park with this one. Finally something we both agree with. I didn't think it was possible, but I'm happy we at least have some similar thoughts on this. Of course, he points out the Mole Man story, which I 100% agree with. He also points out the Barbara story and had this to say about it.
She loves the fame, and she is shameless in pursuing it, and nothing shows that more clearly than Barbara. It struck me as odd the first time I played the game that a comic book would publish the story, real or fictionalized, about the tragic death of a very real young woman, and I wasn't the only one. Edith calls this out as she wanders through the house.
Of all the stories people wrote about Barbara's death, I'm surprised Edie saved this one.
Right? Your daughter dies, but you keep the comic book that retells her getting eaten to death? I mean, that's pretty sinister, even for someone who jokes about death. And sure, we later get this line.
Edie told me all Barbara wanted was to be remembered.
But again, Edie lies. Edie lies a lot. For the real reason that comic book is there, look no further than Great-Grandma's bedroom. Right next to that Mole Man story in Edie's room, and right under the article where she's made famous for not leaving the house, we see a binder labeled Barbara Concepts. Concepts for what? Well, I think it's concepts for stories. She sold Barbara's story, just like she sold Walter's story as the Mole Man. This whole wall is kind of like her wall of fame, little bits of time that she got to be passively famous. She's either directly or indirectly related to the deaths of those around her, at which point she twists them into something fantastical. If I were to guess, it's her creating fictions that make her less responsible for the deaths. It's also probably part coping mechanism. And lastly, is to make those deaths beautiful, poetic. Blame it all on this legendary family curse that allows her stories to live on. All Barbara wanted to be was remembered, Edie? Yeah, I think you might be just talking about yourself.
There's one thing I could argue with, but in general we agree on everything here, so let's just cherish this moment and not disagree.
So far, I've mainly focused on Walter and Barbara, but Edie being a monster is shown less explicitly in other stories too.
Oh no, I have a sneaking suspicion this won't go too well.
Well, let's look at both Molly and Kelvin then, shall we? Molly is the first Finch child that we meet and the first death that we play through. The story goes that she's sent to bed without dinner, and because she's hungry, she decides to eat things like a tube of toothpaste, some Christmas berries, likely holly berries based on the color, and an old carrot. It's speculated that this combination somehow poisons her, but I looked into the food that she ate and I just don't realistically think that it could have actually killed her. The carrot was in the same bowl as what appears to be gerbil droppings, so she could have gotten salmonella, something that's known to be transferred in rodent droppings, but that wouldn't have killed her. She would have been sick with symptoms like stomach cramps, vomiting, and a fever, but all of that would have passed within a week or so. Holly berries are a similar story. She only eats about 3, and while they certainly can be poisonous, she'd have to have eaten 20 or so to have actually ingested a deadly amount. The toothpaste, same pattern. While toothpaste in 1947 had thankfully stopped using soap as an ingredient, they were just starting to use fluoride, which again can be poisonous in large amounts. But 1 tube of toothpaste is highly unlikely to be fatal.
I just want to say we only have what was written down by Molly. We don't truly know if that's all she ate or if the amounts we see are accurate, because I doubt she wrote how many berries she ate. We could also assume from the animal dream sequence that she was maybe having hallucinations or something because of the poisons, but that could have also just been a dream like it's made out to be.
But still, all of this is missing the major point here. Why was Molly hungry in the first place?
I'll be gone soon, but I wanted to tell somebody about what's gonna happen. It started when Mom sent me to bed without dinner.
Edie, her mom, sent her to bed without dinner. She's a 10-year-old girl who is literally locked in her room and starving to death. That is not okay. Intentionally or no, Edie's actions of locking her kid in her room and not feeding her resulted in the child's death in some way.
Yes, I can't add anything to that.
And that's not all. Right next to the Mole Man and Barbara stuff, we have yet another binder of concepts, Molly concepts. Perhaps the story of a girl who goes hungry, but instead of violently starving to death while locked in her room, the whole thing is made magical when her hunger transforms her into a cat, just like we play through in the game. Heck, I wouldn't be surprised if Edie fabricated Molly's journal in the first place.
2 things here. We don't truly know what the concept folders are there for. It could be art concepts, tombstone concepts, or any other concepts. We do not know, since we can't peek inside them, so we can only speculate. What we can be pretty sure of, though, is that if Edie would have wanted to starve her out, the family members would have probably not liked that too much. So yeah, she probably died of poisoning. And secondly, why are you giving the grandmother anime hot girl tooth? I don't know, just was it really odd choice in my opinion, but I guess whatever rocks your boat.
As for Calvin, well, he launches himself off a cliff while playing on a swing. I mean, he didn't build that swing set at the top of a large cliff. That blame absolutely falls on his parents.
Yeah, I agree, Pat. The swing was placed there by the parents, but as we know, Sven was responsible for the house building, so I'd say that that blame falls on Edie's husband more than anything.
That's not all. Notice his leg. It's in a cast. It's broken. Now, is that necessarily Edie's fault? I don't know. I can't find any proof one way or the other.
Question time. Do you think the kid who tries to do a full 360 on a swing would maybe also do other dangerous things and might have broken their leg by doing anything else dangerous? Or do you think the mother broke its own kid's leg without any evidence supporting that claim?
But it's made abundantly clear that her kids are afraid of her.
Where did anyone ever say they were scared of Edie? There is no explicit evidence. If there is just one instance where there is evidence of that in the entire game, please show it to me. I want to know.
And this house is hiding some dark secret that makes people run for their lives, so wouldn't be surprised.
There is nothing in the house that makes anyone run for their lives. Walter was scared by in some way witnessing his sister's presumed death, and we still know nothing about Milton.
At best, Edie is an aggressively neglectful parent. Worse, she's actively attacking her kids. And worst case scenario, she's killing them off when they step out of line, and then covering up the truth with fantastical stories.
From all the evidence presented, we know that there were at least 2 occasions where she was a neglectful parent. Probably not the only ones, but it's the only 2 confirmed ones, and they both led to a dead kid. So let's just agree there was probably more neglectful parenting happening as well.
It's interesting to note that every death in the Finch family has been connected back to Edie in some way. Any family member who lived with her or was close to her has perished. Edie is always there. Edie is there calling to Molly as she starves. She's there calling to Kelvin to come in before he launches himself off a cliff. She's the monster on the other side of Walter's bunker door. Barbara dies in her house, and then Edie goes on to sell the story. There is no curse here. There is only Edie. She is the curse, and I think she knows it.
Ah, yes. I remember how she killed Sam because she was actually cosplaying as the deer and pushed him off the cliff. Or how she was at home killing Barbara when we got told that she was not at home, but only Barbara and Walter were. We can only truly link 2 deaths to Edie, the swing and the poisoning. That's it. No more.
For all the commentary that's been going on about this game, I've never really seen anyone talk about Edie's final story, which you would think would be the most important one of the batch. It's the story that she tells to Edith the night before Edith and her mom run away. It's actually a story that Edie writes in the form of a book, hidden in the now sealed-off library.
No one talks about the final story Edie gives us because we have no information about it. We only know she walked to the old house according to herself. We can't do much with it unless we assume the way theirs was a metaphor and Edie thought a little kid would understand what that even is or even means, but that would be a crazy claim, right?
I think this is meant to be Edie's confession, her telling the story of her past abuses and past misdeeds in the way that only she can, in the form of a highly symbolic, overly fantastical story full of symbolism.
Wait, what? You say that, but when else did she do that? Where was there symbolism in any stories she wrote? What stories did she even write? Which you read until this point? I guess the horror comic, but was there symbolism? I would like the idea more if their deaths actually followed sooner, or were at least somewhat related to Edie in any way, shape, or form, but the deaths are in no way, shape, or form related to Edie, so it's pointless to even go over the footage. Like, none of these even are confirmed that Edie was anywhere around when any of that happened. Alright, let's just get this all over with by showing MatPat's conclusion, and I just want to say, everyone can draw their own conclusions. Just know, I am correct.
However you slice it, Edie is a monster. I don't think there's any way to deny it. Whether or not she actively killed off members of her family intentionally can't truly be proven, at least not yet. But it seems likely that she's been directly involved with many of the tragedies that befell the family. And then she went on to brand the family and its curse in the local pop culture so that she could be immortal. She was selfish, she was cruel, and she was seemingly violent. And when people learned the truth of the Finch matriarch, they had a habit of disappearing. Walter, Milton, what remains of Edith Finch is a mystery of trauma, all pointing back to the actions of one woman.
As I have already stated before, I disagree with a lot of points he brings up here, but I think disproving them here doesn't get anyone anywhere. I just think this video of MatPat's has been very roughly researched, or it has been on purpose misleading. What do I mean by that? Well, figuring out a conclusion that doesn't make sense at first is great clickbait. I agree, I would love to do that. But the problem with that is you have to make it look like a real theory at the end, and it has to make sense. But if I look at this theory for a bit, it just doesn't hold up. Even the clips he chooses to include are not really related or are actually disproving everything he says. Do I think this conclusion was only chosen because of clickbait? I sure hope so, because else, please, MatPat, I just want to ask you. What? Like, I know you can't get everything right each time, but you were actively saying some stuff was evidence for your claim that when you see it in-game says the opposite, or says something completely different. This just really reminds me of the Hollow Knight video again. It's the same thing repeating itself, and the worst part is he doesn't own up to it being wrong, because last time something like this happened, he just basically said, doesn't have to be right as long as it got out a new view on things, which isn't completely wrong, but it just sounds like you're not trying to make a theory, but more of like a conspiracy, not gonna lie. Like, if you give out a theory that gives people the wrong impression of an entire game, or that hands out wrong information, then is it really a theory if you're not trying to solve something? Because this doesn't feel like something you're trying to solve, it feels more like just wanting to get another video out and with a game title that you haven't explored before, which I still think is great. I like this game a lot. By how much I know about that you probably know, but I just wanted to say that I'd rather not have had this video instead of having it with such a conclusion that doesn't make any internal sense. It felt more like a conspiracy, not gonna lie. Well, I guess Conspiracy Theory might be the fifth theory channel from MatPat's. I think his video lacked evidence and research to truly support his claim, but hey, what do I know? Maybe I'm just so stuck up in my way of thinking that I just don't want to see his points. Who knows? In my opinion, this game is about a family where the only thing cursing this family is themselves. That's all there is to it. I can go into more detail and into more depth on this topic, maybe in another video if people would be interested, but since my videos get like 15 views, and I kinda often just do whatever I feel like anyway, I don't know yet. But if I get 50 likes, I'll make a follow-up video where I answer questions and go more in depth on my own theory on this game. But else, I don't know, I'll just do my normal random stuff. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching. Anyways, I hope everyone watching this has a nice day. Even you, Mr. Game Theorist. By the way, MatPat, please stop making everything FNAF and stop the granny with the sexy tooth.